was it maybe عليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So, as with any rulings in the Quran, there are many, the Quran is telling us to have taqwa the whole time. So, there is a general call towards, observing any rules at all, or all rules. And there's one particular verse that just comes to my mind. I didn't actually add today. It's not doesn't really have a rule in it, but it mentions a key principle. It's actually a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told the believers to do exactly the same thing that He's told the prophets to do, namely, Ya ayyuha rusulu kulu min at-tayyibati wa'malu salihan, saying, O prophets, eat of that which is halal and do good deeds. And then the hadith continues to mention the problem of not doing good deeds. And how a person mentioned the hadith where a man will be traveling in the desert and he loses his camel and loses his food and loses his drink. And he's calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, Oh Allah, please help me. Ya Allah, please help me. But the problem is that his income has been haram, and his food has been haram, and his clothes have been haram. And it mentions, فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ, how on earth should he be answered? Right? That's not a verse of the Quran, it's a hadith, so it's not exactly relevant to what we're looking at. We're looking at the verse of the Quran, but it does quote the Quran. I should have added it here. So this is the general elan, the general kind of like recommendation or the direction is make sure you eat halal food because it's going to affect what you do. Right? كُلُوا مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَاعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا. Eat of the good and healthy things, i.e. the halal, وَاعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا, and do good deeds. I.e. the opposite is the case. Eat haram, do haram. And there's many hadiths about this as well. So this is the general idea. But in terms of the rules, these are the main things. So what I've done in reality in this class is I've taken a recording, a whole lecture that I gave on halal food, and I just cut it up a little bit. So there's a lot to be said about halal food, and there are certain concepts, certain principles that need to be understood. I've cut it up and cut things out here because I'm trying to focus on the material here. But inshallah, I'm going to share on the group a whole playlist of four videos that are very important. As far as I know, um, there isn't online. There aren't things that really talk about these basic concepts that I talk about in that playlist, and it's in English, etc. Of course, so it's quite an important series of lectures to listen to. It's only a bit more than an hour, but it is important. But it's basically this class with a few little things here and there. So one of the first things is the default assumption on things. So this is what we call in Arabic قاعدة فقهية, a legal maxim. All right, a legal maxim. So how do we work with these scenarios where we have the default assumption of something and then doubt regarding that thing? Right? So this applies to wudu, this applies to prayer, this applies to halal food, this applies to inheritance, this applies to everything. Divorce, right? Somebody doubts, did he divorce his wife or not? He doubts, was it twice or was it three times? How does this work, right? And so there is this fun, overarching kind of principle, which is indeed mere conjecture. Inna dhanna la yughni min al-haqqi shay'a, right? Is that indeed conjecture, the mere possibility of something, means nothing in the face of fact. We have a dhan, which is conjecture, and we have al-haq, which is fact, right? And so when we're looking at food and saying, is it halal or not, we always have to find out, there's lots of things we don't know, right? There's lots of things we don't know. But we do have default structures, right? we do have default structures. So, for example, as a mujtahid, as a scholar who is trying to decipher whether or not the Quran and Hadith has forbidden a certain food, where do I start? Do I start on the assumption that the food is halal, or do I start on the assumption that the food is haram? So I'm discussing, for example, squid. Can I eat squid? I'm discussing, can I eat E471? So I'm coloring. What is the assumption where that I'm starting from? That I failed to find a hadith to forbid this, or I failed to find a hadith that reverses the Quran to allow it. What's the default? The default is that it's halal. That's the assumption, right? The default on anything that is not harmful is that it's going to be halal. Now that's the assumption for whom? For the researcher, for the mujtahid, for the scholar. As for you and I, the default is everything is haram until we know otherwise. So can I eat squid? I don't know. Let's ask Mufti so-and-so. Oh, Mufti so-and-so hasn't responded to my answer. I'll just do it. Haram. It's haram even if it's halal, because it's not halal for a non-researcher, a non-mujtahid scholar, somebody who's not looking at all the different sources in the Sharia to come up with make assumptions about halal haram. You can't do that. And so the default, because you don't know, the default is everything haram until proven otherwise. Right? Unless you know this is bread. Well, the default on bread is that it's halal until proven otherwise. This is water. Well, I don't know if I can drink water or not. Well, the default on water is I can drink it until proven otherwise. So this is a system, a way of thinking. What is the default of something? Okay, the default. So when you're talking about with imported meat, I don't want to beat around the bush, but you either have an unknown source. So this meat is not from where I am right now. Okay, this meat that is either has an unknown source. I don't know where it's from, but it's not here. It's from a Muslim country, or it's from a majority Christian Jewish country. Okay, if it's from an unknown source, what is the default of meat on planet Earth? Okay, so there's meat that's in front of me right now. This meat is from somewhere on planet Earth. I have no idea. It's not from where I am right now, that's for sure. Right? The default is what? It's not halal. Right? Why is that the case? Right? That is the case because the majority of the world are not A, eligible to slaughter meat, meaning they're not Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and B, they don't slaughter properly. Right? Now, is it possible that the meat in front of me is actually halal? Totally possible. Why not? But that's not the default. So meat of unknown source by default is haram. Now, I'm not saying that it's haram. I'm just saying it's by default it's haram. Just like I'm not saying squid is haram. I'm just saying I didn't know if squid was halal or not haram. I didn't know what to do. I called up my mufti friend. He didn't respond. So I don't know what to do. What's the default? I can't eat it. Right? You wanted to borrow my car and you didn't know if you had permission or not. You had the keys, but you weren't sure. So you tried to call me up, tried to call my brother, tried to call my wife. No response. Let's just take his car anyway. It's okay. Inshallah, it's okay. If you know me and you know that I might mind, right? And so you're not really sure if you have permission or not, then it's not the fact that you don't have permission, it's the fact that you don't know that you have permission. Then we have a majority Muslim country. So is this meat actually from a majority Muslim country? Yes. Then I asked a question, do they normally slaughter it in a proper way? In this Muslim country, is it normal that they slaughter it in a proper Islamic way? So yes. Um, as long as these Muslims normally do that, even if they didn't happen to do it this time, right? The chicken that you're eating was slaughtered in a Muslim country, but the guy who slaughtered it was an atheist. the chicken that you're eating right now is from a Muslim country, but it happened to be stamped to death by somebody in an abattoir. It doesn't matter what the reality is. The point is the default of meat from a Muslim country is that it's halal. That's the default. Assuming that they normally do that, if that's the case. I don't know personally of any Muslim country where the meat from that country specifically is not Islamically slaughtered. I don't know of that, right? Maybe they exist. I don't know. But as far as I know, that's the norm, right? Now, I don't need to positively know that. I don't actually even have to research it. All I have to know is this meat is actually from, I don't know, and when I say Muslim country here, I don't mean a country ruled by Muslims. I mean a country that is 51% Muslim. That's what I'm interested in. So this meat is from Chad. As far as I know, that in Chad it is majority Muslim. So if it's more than 51%, right, and more than 51% of those Muslims slaughter properly, then the default is the meat is halal. It doesn't actually matter if it's not halal. That's not relevant because I'm just going on that. What is the default? Okay, go ahead, Mikhail.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh. Um, so I'm asking this just out of curiosity, but I know that I've read conflicting reports about how now Saudi is importing meat from Brazil instead um, of the previous place they used to buy meat, and a lot of people were saying that the whether its origins were halal was quite dubious. So
Good.
according,
So let's go back a step. So is the default that Saudi imports, or is the default then Saudi does not import?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I
Okay.
don't know.
Let's imagine I don't have access to information. Okay,
Mhm,
I arrive from planet from Mars. Okay,
mhm,
I arrive from Mars and I arrive in a Muslim country.
mhm.
So what is the default?
Default would be that you assume it's sourced from there, right?
Yeah, that's the assumption. So I don't even
Okay.
need to ask. That's the point. So I'm in Saudi. I don't need to ask. Now, it
Mhm,
just so happens, I'm sorry, bro, that I lived in Saudi for 20 years. And you're like, oh, and you say, listen, we're in Saudi Arabia. The meat, there's no, there's not a lot of rain in Saudi Arabia, and actually most of the meat is not from here, right? For example,
mhm,
I lived in Jordan, so you arrive in Amman, right? You have a stop off in Amman in Jordan. You're like, yeah, I mean, it's a Muslim country, khalas. No, you don't need to ask any questions. You
mhm,
don't have to ask, is this actually halal? You just eat any
mhm,
meat in Jordan, and you're fine. Now, I was there for 13 years, and I'm like, oh, Habibi, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's not like that. Uh,
mhm,
and it's like this and it's like this. And I'm like, oh, is that local or is that not? Is etc. But the point is, what's the default setting? So the default setting is meat. So why is the
mhm,
default, and this is kind of again principle and fit, is why is the default that the meat is not imported? Because that's extra information, right?
mhm, yeah.
So for example, you say, Fareed, um, where's the default of where you've been in the world? So you know that right now I'm sitting in California. I'm in the Bay Area. The default is you've been nowhere else because that's extra information. So the default is
Mhm,
I'm actually born in the very point where I am right now.
uh-huh.
Because that's against the default to assume that, for example, I've been to the north or to the south of America or that I've been to another country. That's extra information. So
Mhm,
these are default settings, right? When you lose something, you say, hey, go to the place where you last saw it because the default is it hasn't moved, right?
right.
So these are
Yeah.
the settings. So the question is, do I even have to ask? No, you don't have to ask, right? And for some
Mhm,
people, it's wrong to ask actually, right? Your
mhm,
friend is like new to be practicing the deen. You're like, hey, I know we're going on Umrah, I know we're going to the sacred house of Allah, but these guys are a bit, they're a bit 50-50.
mhm,
It's not a good thing to do for them, right? Because they're not actually
yeah.
obliged to do that to begin with. They weren't obliged.
Mhm,
For me and you, be like, yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we know, right? Things are not ideal, and we should have wara. We should be scrupulous, and we should check, right? I know
mhm,
things with Saudi, any place that's a desert, right? I can assume that's the case, right? Any place
mhm,
that, and then so I should be careful, right? And so being careful is a very good idea, but that's very different to in terms of what your obligation is. I'm in a Muslim country. The default is Muslims slaughter in a normal way. I don't need to check in if in Azerbaijan they cancelled halal way of slaughtering. I don't need to check that. Maybe
Mhm.
that's the case. Weird, Muslim regimes. I don't know. Post USSR regimes. I don't know. I don't need to check that though. I say
Mhm.
the default. This is 51% Muslim. Okay, the meat therefore is halal until proven otherwise.
Okay. All right. Jazakumullah khairan.
Yeah. So unknown source, haram. Muslim
Mm.
country by default, halal.
Okay.
Unless I know
No.
otherwise, right? But I'm not obliged to check, right? Um, You know,
No.
and so I'm not saying that checking is bad, but I'm saying you're not obliged to check. There's two different things.
Yeah.
And then
No.
meat is from Brazil. This meat is from America, right? This happened. I was in Amman, in Jordan, have a nice hamburger, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna check, right? I'm just gonna check. And so I called up the company and they say, yeah, your meat is is from America. I was like, oh.
Mhm.
So now the
Mhm.
question is America, right? The land of the practicing Orthodox Jews, the land of the Christians who slaughter is an Islamic way. You say, what are you talking about? I mean, North America, the whole of North America are Orthodox Jews. I don't think that's the case. Okay, but they're Christian then. Okay, 70, I think 73 or 75% of North America is either Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. The fact that there's a 25% chance that they're not, it actually doesn't matter. I'm not asking for it to be 100%. Is it possible that they're from the meat is from Utah, who are Mormons, and Mormons are not Jews or Christians? That doesn't matter. I don't need to know whether it's from Utah or not. Just North America. So this meat is from North America. So I asked the question, is it normal in North America that they slaughter properly? And the answer is no, right? Are they actually Christians? That's another question. So meat from Utah specifically, that would be a problem, right? Whether they're Christians or not, there's a question that's debated. So for example, the Shafi'is, extremely strict when it comes to proving that somebody is a Christian. Like it's basically impossible to find a legal Christian today, right? So in the Shafi school, it's very hard to marry a Christian or a Jew or to eat meat from a Christian or Jew. It's very, very hard. Anyway, putting that to the side, this is this process. So most people think like this and don't think like this, if that makes sense. Like, um, most people, they might think either as you have to have certainty, right? So I need to know that this meat is halal, or I'm not going to eat it. That's actually impossible, right? Unless you yourself slaughtered the meat, you don't know that. So Brother Mikhail, for example, he goes and kills this sheep. I actually don't know if he's actually a Muslim or not. I'm not
I
obliged to.
am Sheikh.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, but maybe you might be lying. You know what I'm saying? You might be lying. You might be an AI. Or you might say it, and then the moment you slaughter, you might leave Islam, right? So if you're going to be pedantic, and say, I actually have to have yaqeen, right? It's actually impossible. It gets to the point of like, that's impossible. And so nobody's asking for people to do that. So they're like, oh, brother, don't be strict. Nobody's asking to be strict. Nobody's actually asking for that. They're not asking for that. What they're saying is, what's the default? They're saying that, brother, I rolled the dice and it was less than 51%. Right? I'm not even asking for 100%. I don't need to know that this meat, they're like, brother, you're going to ask me that whether the chicken took his shahada before he died. So no, I'm not. Right? I'm not going to ask you for that. Right? So people, they think you're being pedantic when you ask these questions. I'm not. I'm just saying that this is, it's not normally the case. Right? The default, if a Muslim says it's halal, then it's true. Because the default is that a Muslim is speaking the truth, though he might not be. And the default is that the Muslim knows what halal is, haram is. That's the default. But if in your country that is no longer the default, right? That is no longer the default, that Muslims do lie, for example, or Muslims don't know what is halal and haram, then in which case it doesn't mean anything, does it? Right? So it's always you go by the default. What is the default assumption? You arrive from Mars What would you assume about the situation? Not what is the situation. And from there you work up. And then it actually can be relative, right? So your passing through Amman is different to me passing through Amman. You passing through North America is different to me because I don't know information. So there's information that I have, right? And for the default is one thing with for me, and the default is something for you. So often we're going to hear these fatwa, a fatwa from the sheikh so and so and sheikh so and so. They're actually saying the same thing. That was my conclusion when I looked at Salafi, Hanafi, Shanafi, this and that. Everyone's actually saying the same thing. They're all saying the same thing. But the answer they give is based on a different tasawwur of the waqi, a different conception of what is the norm, right? So this person is saying, well, North America is majority Christian and Christians slaughter in Islamic way. Right? That's the concept in their mind. So if that's what's in their mind, that's okay. That's not a problem until they find out otherwise. And they're not obliged to find out otherwise. But somebody who lives in America, who knows the otherwise, they would say, no, it's not like that. Does that make sense? Am I making sense for everybody? Mustafa, Amir, Maryam, Ibni, Ahmed, right? So it's important things are relative, right? I give you an example. Like I'm a parent, okay? I'm a parent. My child does something, okay? 10 minutes later, we're going to pray. Do I need to ask my child if he has wudu or not? Now, I'm not going to pray behind my child. But in respect to my child, the child A might not have noticed or remembered what it just did, right? So in respect to my child, he has wudu, right? Now, I know he doesn't have wudu. But in respect to my child, he has wudu. Do I need to remind him, say, hey, you have to make wudu? No, I don't, because that's not right. You know, um, for example, that there's a scholar who is a fake scholar. Okay, there's a fake scholar who is giving fatwa and it's all wrong. Your friend who doesn't understand much about the systems of halal and haram, they're just new to the scene of practicing the religion, right? They said, well, I asked Sheikh so and so, he said it was halal. And you're like, yeah, but technically you can't ask Sheikh so and so. In respect to your friend, Sheikh so and so is a scholar. Because on Judgment Day, all your friend will be asked is, did you ask an Islamic authority? And they did. And that was the answer. They don't know Sunni, Shi'i, Hanafi, Shanafi, real Hanafi, Hanafi, real, not unreal. They don't know that. So in respect to them, they went to a scholar. Right? If you can sit down and explain to them, say, this brother is not a real scholar, fine. But that's not actually their obligation. So it's a key thing to understand. Many people do things they don't actually understand the world. And they are not expected to understand the world. They're actually dealing on their level, the way that they see things. And when it comes to their own worship, their own eating of halal and food, etc., that's actually okay, right? Right? It's actually okay. Okay, so that's a good example, right? Good example. So Mir, right? So when I think of India, I erroneously I incorrectly assume it's a Muslim country, and the meat says it's from India. Can I eat it? Right, Mir. So there's meat that came to my table and it said from India, and I thought that the majority of India was Muslim. Can I eat the meat? Ahmed, Ibni, Maryam, Mustafa. Can I eat the meat? I know, but me, I my I don't know anything. I think in my mind India is a Muslim country. Okay, and meat comes to me from India, and it says India. I say, oh, India, Muslim country. Can I eat the meat? Yeah. So is it does it matter if they are the majority or if I think that they're the majority, right? So when it comes to my own actions between me and Allah, it doesn't matter about the reality. It matters about what I think is reality. So I erroneously thought that India was a majority Muslim, and so that's what I did. But then you realize otherwise. No, you cannot eat it. Does that make sense?
Salam alaikum.
What, Alex? Go ahead, mate.
I'm sorry. Actually, we live in India, so we get direct slaughtered meat from few Muslim areas.
Okay,
But as for if we go across India, so we don't find we cannot believe that it is halal. Always.
exactly.
I mean, with the
But what
yeah.
my point, Mir, is because you know what India is. You say India is a huge country. It is not majority Muslim, and
Mm-hmm.
when you say meat from India, the default is it's not halal. But what I'm trying to say is it's relative, meaning if I didn't know that and I thought that
Okay.
India was a default Muslim country, it's fine, right?
Okay. Sure.
Maybe, for example, there's a law in India. Okay, there's a law in India that they ban halal food. Okay, you knew about
Okay.
it and I didn't, and it said halal right on it. So now I'm buying it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it must be halal because it's from India and it says halal on it. And it turns out now they've banned slaughtering meat in a halal way. So I didn't know that, right? So
Okay.
what I'm trying to say is it's
Okay.
actually relative, and this is important because people are not all religious and people are not all intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
So what a lot of these times you're like, subhanallah, I've explained this to my cousin 20 times. I don't know why he doesn't understand it.
Okay. Then
Right.
I
And
got
so
it now.
some of these things are actually relative, right? It's actually relative. Like whether this person can eat it or not is actually relative, depending on what they know and how much they can understand and how, to some extent, how religious they are.
So
Okay.
what we do is on the basis of shak, we don't eat it otherwise.
Yes. So here's an
Alhamdulillah.
important thing. Here's an important thing, Mir. Okay. So let's imagine the meat, you had some meat and it's most likely from this area in India. And in that
Okay.
area, it is most likely that it is um there's Muslims there. You can eat it, even though
Okay.
they're Shek. Because what I'm
Okay.
interested in not I'm not interested in 100%, I'm interested in 51%. Okay?
Okay. I got
However,
it.
is it
Alhamdulillah.
better to be careful? It's better to be careful. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's better to say, no, I don't know, I'm not going to eat it. So one of my friends, for example, and teachers, he only eats meat that he sees slaughtered in front of his eyes.
Subhanallah.
He lives in a Muslim country,
Subhanallah.
right? But that's called
Subhanallah.
wara, right? That's called wara, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's extreme, extreme being extremely careful, right? But in terms of
Subhanallah.
halal and haram, you say, what is the default? This meat is from this shop. Okay, this shop is where there's an area where there's majority Muslim. Okay, then it should be from here, right? And the default is these people slaughter properly. Now, you, as somebody who's a local, you know more information, so it's different, right?
Yes,
But what I'm
exactly.
trying to say is,
Exactly.
you turn up in a Muslim country or you're in a Muslim area, the default as a Muslim is from the meat is from here. It's not from 100 miles away. That's the default is from
Yeah.
here. If that's the default, khalas. I don't need to ask any questions. And again, I repeat, for some people, it's not even good to ask questions. It's not a good idea for some people. It causes them a doubt in Muslims. It causes them, they don't know the difference between, they don't know how to apply this system properly. So they start doubting everything, right? Even though they shouldn't doubt
Very,
it. So anyway, you say
very true.
unknown source, meat from planet Earth by default is haram. Muslim country by default halal. Majority Jewish or Christian country, I ask the question, do they normally slaughter in a proper way? If yes,
Hmm?
Allah, right? If that's the case, right? If in Brazil they normally slaughter in an Islamic way, Bismillah. If in America they normally slaughter in an Islamic way, fine. If that is not the case, then you cannot eat meat from Brazil or from I don't know what, right?
Subhanallah.
Or I don't know. The meat is from South Africa. I don't know actually. I don't know. In South Africa, is it majority Muslim? I know lots of Muslims from South Africa, but I don't know. Or India, I don't know. I don't have the information. I didn't think about it, right? I'm not sure. Is it majority? And then it turns out, so then it's relative to me. If I think no, South Africa is not a majority Muslim country, then I cannot eat it. And if I think India by default is not a majority Muslim country, then I cannot eat it, right? Um, but I'm not obliged to ask a question that is the opposite of the default. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not obliged to ask a question that is the opposite of the default. Um, so here, this is the problem. That is, so what we find is some people, they're either ridiculously strict and they're asking for yaqeen, they're asking for certainty, which is not true, or they are saying that everything is assumed to be halal all the time, regardless if it's the ala khilaf al-asl, even if it's the opposite of the default. So, for example, in here in Sahih Bukhari, I know we're trying to keep to the verse of the Quran, but it's important. He says, "What if I send my dog? This is hunting, and then I find another dog with it, and I don't know which one killed it." Okay, so it's not three dogs, two and one. It's two dogs. So it's an issue of not 51%, but 50-50. I said Bismillah and I sent my dog to kill the rabbit. And there's two dogs there. I don't know which one killed the dog. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't eat it in that case because you only said Allah's name for the dog, not the other dog. Right? For your dog, not the other dog. So you don't know. Okay? Well, what if I sent 200 dogs and then I found 201 dogs? So, well, I don't know which dog killed the rabbit, but the default is mine because that's the default. Similarly, when the Prophet ﷺ said, when you shoot your arrow, then say Allah's name. If you then find it dead, then eat it, unless you find that it has fallen in water, because you don't know whether it drowned or died from the water. You're not sure. It could be this, it could be this, so I don't know. But as long as it's more than 51%, it's halal to eat. And so people today, again, we're off topic, and I spoke about this in the first class, but people today will quote modern scholars. Don't quote me, and don't quote my teachers, and don't quote some other teacher and his teachers. That we have been around for a long time. The Ummah has been around for a long time, right? There is no new discussion to have. We already know all the discussions. So this is Imam al-Baji. Imam al-Baji from Muslim Spain, who traveled the world and studied with great scholars all over the world and came back, and he was a key scholar of Maliki fiqh and a commentator on hadith. He has a book called Al-Muntaqa, Sharh al-Muwatta. So he says, if one knows that certain Christians eat unslaughtered meat, one may not eat the meat that they slaughter unless one sees how such a Christian slaughters. So you say, are they a Christian? Yes. What is the default of a Christian or Jew, that they slaughter properly? Yes. Okay, go ahead. But then I ask you the question, okay, in America, North America, is it normal in North America that the Jews and the Christians and even the Muslims slaughter a proper way? The answer is no. Therefore, if you know that's the case, so now I'm going to eat meat from France or eat meat from Germany or eat meat from America. Is that the case, that they slaughter properly? No, it is not. Right? If it is known that he may well slaughter an animal in an invalid way, one must not eat any animal that dies at his hands until one knows that the slaughter was done in a valid way. So he's saying there's the default, which is a Jew or Christian slaughters in a proper Islamic way. That's the default. So they'll quote the hadith, the Prophet, he didn't ask questions, he just ate. Yes, because that was the default. So a Jew in Arabia at the time of the Prophet is not like a reformist Jew today, right? or a Christian from, I don't know, Abyssinia and time of the Prophet Sallallahu is not like a Christian in Germany today, or in England today, or in France today, or in America today. We know, anybody who lives in the West, that they say Western Christians do not slaughter their meat in any particular way. They just shoot it or electrocute it or something. So if it is known that he may well slaughter in a, not that there's doubt. He says that may well. It's likely, right? One must not eat any meat until you know that's the case. So you're not expected to know the name of the chicken, but you're expected to know that by default this meat is from a Muslim country, or by default this meat is from Jews and Christians, and by default they slaughter it in a normal way, right? So I'm in India, and there's a Christian community, and I'm eating in a restaurant from a Christian community. Can I just eat the meat without asking? I say, I don't know. Ask a local. Is it normal that Christians in that modern Christians in India slaughter the meat? I don't think so, right? Because I know that Christianity is somewhat new to India in reality. Christianity came with the British, etc. It's not really a part of ancient Indian culture, such that it would go back to the time of Sayyidina Isa and back to the time of Sayyidina Musa, etc. I don't think that's the case, right? So you cannot just eat the Christian meat of any Christian, or you can't do that. But an Orthodox Jew, he's an Orthodox Jew. He's not a reformist Jew. I don't know what an Orthodox Jew is, but if you say I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm assuming you slaughter your meat. I don't need to go and ask all the details about how you do it and what you don't do and don't do, right? If that is the default. But a reformist Jew, I know that you don't apply your Sharia. That's what you mean. Reformist Jew means a Jew that doesn't apply the Sharia. So I don't know what you apply, but the default is your meat is not halal. So the default assumption on meat on planet Earth is that it's haram. The default assumption on everything else besides meat is that it is halal. So here is a chemical that is in my food. I don't know what it is. What is the default? It's halal. I don't know I don't have to check what it is. I'm not obliged to find out what it is. Right? I'm not obliged to do that. Conditions of slaughter. So number one, Muslim, Jew, or Christian. Right. Number two, that the four veins, right, on one's neck, the two on either side. So some of them are veins, some of them are arteries. The trachea and the esophagus, these have to be cut. In reality, there's debate on these issues. There are debate on these issues, the details of some of these things, but this is the basic picture. If these things are cut, the esophagus, trachea, arteries, etc., right? So you ask the guy in the shop and said, were these four veins and arteries cut? And he says, yes. And he says, trachea was cut. I said, well, he could be lying, right? So if the default is that everybody's a liar, then yeah. But if the default is everybody's not lying, then you can eat it, right? You ask him, what is a trachea? And he doesn't know what a trachea is. What is esophagus? He says, I don't know what it is. Then obviously he doesn't know what he's talking about. So this happened, for example, I'm not going to go into details here. Okay, so or if it is killed by a trained hunting animal, then it is not a condition that these things happen. So when you go hunting, you are not able to do that. When you go hunting, that doesn't apply, right? And there has to be some kind of instrument or weapon if hunting, and we have to say Bismillah. There's debate on the Bismillah in reality. The Shafis say it's not a condition to say Bismillah, even if intentionally. If you intentionally didn't say Bismillah, it's fine, right? And there's discussions on some other things as well, but this is the default picture that we have here. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, prohibited to you are dead animals, meta, non-Islamically slaughtered meat, blood, right? Flesh of swine, right? So pigs, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah. So the Shafi'is, that's what they mean. When you say saying Bismillah, is mean you didn't say in the name of Lat or the name of Thor or in the name of Zeus, right? As opposed to you didn't say Bismillah, that's fine. And those animals killed by strangling, so you have to slaughter it. Or by a violent blow, you hit the animal on the head. No. Or by a headlong fall, or by the goring of horns, another animal stabbed it with horns, and those from which a wild animal has eaten. Okay? Except what you are able to slaughter. So this animal has not died, right? So you can go and kill it properly. And that which is slaughtered to stone altars, right? Sacrificial people slaughtering to idols, etc. And so what is the verse saying is it has to be Islamically slaughtered, meaning cut, right? So strangling, no. Violent blow to the head, no. Electrocution, no, right? This is the point. But here we have an apparent conflict. Here we have an apparent conflict because it says, and the food of those who were given the scripture before you, Ahl al-Kitab, is permissible for you. So here we have a debate. Do we say food, an animal has to be Islamically slaughtered, even if it's from the Jew or Christian? Or do we say the food has to be Islamically slaughtered if it's from a Muslim? But if it's not from a Muslim and it's from a Jew or a Christian, then it does not have to be Islamically slaughtered. Right? So this criterion here, when it says it has to be not like this, right? Not killed by strangling, and not by this, and not by this, and not by this. Are you talking about when it's for a Muslim, or is that for a non-Muslim? Here we have a debate, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. And they ask you, Allah and ask you what has been made halal for them. They say all wholesome things. Okay? And so here, Imam Shafi'i, I'm just speaking from the Shafi'i point of view here, he took this word wholesome. He said, what does wholesome mean? Has Allah described it for us in the Quran? So he said, no, Allah has not explained what wholesome means for us. So we look in the Arabic language, okay? And we don't have really a word for this, right? What does that mean? So Imam Shafi'i, he said, we don't have a verse of the Quran or a hadith to specify it. Nor do we have, and the Arabic dictionary is not going to help us. So we're going to go to urf and ada of the Arabs. This is how Imam Shafi'i worked. He says the normal practice of the Arabs. So Imam Shafi'i said, whatever the Arabs at the time of the Prophet, whatever they would eat, right? And they in normal times, not times of famine, of course, right? That if they ate that thing, that means it's halal. And if they didn't eat that thing, that means it's not halal. So, for example, a rat. Rats are not considered wholesome foods, right? One, that we were told to kill them, but two, because the Arabs, they did not used to eat rats as a food, right? They did not used to eat, I don't know, slugs as a food. You can't eat those things. A slug, a beetle. That's not wholesome food. It's not normal food that you eat. Okay, as opposed to something that's like a rat, a jerboa, yerboa, right? That's those long-tailed kind of jumping rabbit-like kind of rats of the desert. It's called a jerboa, a yerboa. That's something that they used to eat. So that is considered halal. A rabbit is halal, right? Some people might say that's disgusting. How can I eat a rabbit? It's a cute little furry thing, right? But that's, to you, it sounds disgusting. But to them, it's totally fine. You look at it as perhaps something that crawls around in a hole in the ground, right? Maybe you don't look at it as a cute animal, but they considered it wholesome. So yes, you can eat a rabbit. It's totally fine, right? A lizard, right? A lobber lizard, right? That was a big kind of lizard that they have in Arabia. I might find it disgusting, but they used to eat it, and so it's totally fine to eat it, right? So this is relative, and this is reality debated here, and there's an issue of debate, but this at least just showing you one methodology, right, of these things. As has game killed by those hunting animals, dogs, cheetahs, falcons, that you have taught what Allah has taught you. Eat what they catch from and mention Allah's name over it. Right? So this is a concept then. There's normal slaughter and then hunting slaughter. They're not the same, right? So if we take the most lenient opinion, the easiest way to eat meat from a non-Muslim is what? What's the easiest way you could imagine? Your neighbor is called Bob, he's Christian, and he goes duck hunting. That's actually the easiest way to eat halal food. Because he's Bob, he's a Christian, and he just shot an animal, right? And you say, Bob, did you say, next time you go, Bob, next time you go hunting, can you just say, in the name of God? He's like, yeah, of course, in the name of God, before you pull the trigger. Great. Easy, right? In reality, there's some issues of debate in terms of the tool, like a shotgun versus a rifle, for example. There's issues there. Similarly, there's issues of, is he actually a Christian or not? There's a debate. But generally speaking, hunting is pretty easy because of the criterion is very low, right? You don't need to slaughter properly, right? Somebody goes hunting, they're hunting elk, right? Ibni is in Canada, right? So someone goes in Canada, yeah, it's hunting season, it's fine, right? And here, do not eat of that which Allah's name has not been mentioned on it. And again, we debated that. We said that the Shafis, they say it's not a condition. Majority of scholars say it's a condition. So the Shafis, they say meaning, you mentioned another name. You said, I shoot in the name of Thor. I shoot in the name of Odin. Something like that, in the name of some other god, Vishnu or whatever, right? Or Lat or Uzza or something. Right? So, Jew or Christian, if by default they slaughter in a proper way, that's okay. Right? There's some debate on these things, but again, if these things are basically done, it's fine. Trained animal if they're hunting, so not just any animal. Right? The issue with the gun is what? Again, I can't cover it here because the issues with the gun are mentioned in different hadiths. So I'll talk about that in another lecture. You can listen to that. But generally speaking, here's a Christian. This Christian said, in the name of God, and shot this buffalo right in the head, or in the leg, and it bled to death. It's fine. Okay. Now, on the issue of the Jew and Christian, this is very relevant, right? Very, very relevant. If you live in the West, it's very relevant, right? If you live in India, it's not that relevant because you're not dealing with Ahl Kitab. Now, in reality, some Muslims deemed Hindus to be Ahl Kitab, right? It's a minority opinion, right? They say that the Hindus are actually Ahl Kitab, right? But that's a very minority opinion. But otherwise, if you're living in America and Europe and America, Australia, you're living in majority Christian lands. Right? People by default are Christian. You bump into somebody, say, "Are you Christian?" He says yes, and the other one says no, and then it says yes, 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 no, yes, 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 no, no, yes, 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 no. Majority of people, more than 50%, right, is Christian. So therefore, it's the default. Okay. So the majority vote of the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the Hanbalis and the Hanafis, right, is that the majority vote is that a Jew or a Christian has to slaughter properly. Hmm? The default vote. Okay, so here's a point, right? A key concept that we have to promote and help people understand. Okay, what about the scholars who were not Maliki or Shafi'i or Hanbali or Hanafi? You say, Habibi, there don't exist scholars who are not that aren't of those madhahib. That the ummah for the last 1,400 years, when you say like the votes of the world, the discussions of the world, everybody who is writing on halal and haram has either been this, this, or this, or this. With the exception of maybe one person here and one person there. So it's very important to understand that, right? That so majority vote. Anyway, majority vote, and you say the former madhahib. Well, if you say in the Maliki school, in the Shafi'i school, like those thousands of scholars, 10,000 scholars that looked into the Quran and Sunnah from one point of view, or looked in the Quran and Sunnah from another point of view, or looked at the Quran and Sunnah from another point of view. These schools of thinkers, they all said a Christian or a Jew must slaughter properly. Okay? They must slaughter properly. According to Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi and some Malikis, right? I'm not going to lie. It's not just one scholar. Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, he's the Qadi of Cordoba. He's in Spain, right? Where there's Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And he was in Muslim Spain. He said it is not a condition that a Jew or a Christian slaughters properly, as long as that is the طعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم. It is the meat of the people who've been given the book, right? So Al-Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi says, here's a priest. He is obviously a Christian, and a chicken is killed for him by strangling, right? And he eats it. He says, what is that then? That's called طعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم. That's called the food of the people before you, right? And other Malikis as well supported this view as well. But it is not the Maliki school. Go and ask a Maliki Mufti, and they say that's not our school. That is not a relied upon position of school. And in fact, Al-Baji said the opposite. So Al-Baji, who was before Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, and arguably on a higher level, he said the opposite. He said, didn't we see that quote? So someone's going to quote Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi and say, well, if I'm going to quote one Maliki, I'm going to quote another Maliki. And then I'm going to look at the votes in the Maliki school and see how it works. And you're going to see the majority vote is no, right? So it is not a strong position, but it is a position, right? It's important to understand that we hear certain hyperbole sometimes. To say all Muslims say that, you mean the majority of Muslims say that. There's a difference, right? So you want to follow this situation. You say, I believe that I can eat the meat of any Jew or Christian. As long as he's Jew or Christian, I can eat his meat. Is there some basis for that? Yes. Is it flimsy? Yes. Are you risking your akhirah? Yes. Are you happy to do that? Go ahead. Knock yourself out. Right? And I can't do inkar of that. I can't come and say that's haram. Because I don't know that it's haram. It's not just one person. Right? And it's not just a quote from the Salaf. It's something that's there. We know he said that. Because it's clear he said that. This is a real scholar. Right? He said that, and other Malikis agreed with him. Majority of Malikis did not agree. Right? So there's issues that are weak, and I would not advise people to follow. It's not a good idea. But you can't come along and tell somebody don't follow it. Okay? So I'm in America, right? And the default is this. Here's the problem. Okay? I go to a Muslim shop. And it says halal. And I know, because I live in America, that halal doesn't mean anything. So these are Muslims. So the debate here is a Jew or a Christian obliged to slaughter Islamically? So now I come along and say, brother, it's okay. Al-Qadi Abu Bakr al-Awri said this, don't be so strict. But this is not meat from طعام الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم. This is not Jewish and Christian meat. This is Muslim meat. And you know that the majority of their meat is not Islamically slaughtered. So what if a Muslim does not slaughter properly? Is that halal? No, that's haram by 100% agreement. What are you talking about? Okay? So somebody says, yeah, I just go to the store and eat. I say, okay, it's up to you. But that's a very weak opinion. Very weak opinion. And again, in the beginning of the class, we spoke about people following fringe opinions. And similarly, in the full lecture of this thing on halal and haram food, we speak about that as well. And so that Imam al-Awza'i, what did he say about somebody who follows fringe opinions? He says, whoever follows fringe opinions leaves the deen. That's what happens to them. So the way of my teachers and what I teach is follow the former dhahib. If it's relied upon position in one of the former dhahib, bismillah, go ahead. You don't have to be strict. You don't have to follow just Hanafi or just Maliki. That's fine. This is a real opinion. But the Malikis, they knew what Qadi Abu Bakr al-Awri said, and they said he's wrong. That's the majority vote in the Maliki school. Scholar after scholar after scholar. Yes, He and a few others said something. Yes, you can follow if you really want to, but you're risking your life in the akhirah, right? So that's an issue of, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ said. He said the clearly haram is haram and the clearly halal is halal, and between them are doubtful matters. You want to have a low level of iman, knock yourself out. You want to risk your akhirah, knock yourself out. You want to stand before Allah and say, Allah, I knew that 99% of the ummah said one thing and 1% something else, and I followed it. Okay, that's up to you. And so the problem is that people aren't aware of the facts. They're not aware of the fact that that's a 99% vote against you, right? So it's important to know that. But if you want to follow something, bismillah, you do it. It's up to you. And then the issue of the gun, again, we don't have time to talk about this here because it's kind of going out of the scope. So here in Sahih Bukhari, O Messenger of Allah, people bring us meat and we can't figure out whether or not they mentioned Allah's name. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? You say Allah's name and eat. So wrong understanding. You should never ask if meat is halal or not. Wrong. Right understanding. The Prophet ﷺ gave a fatwa based on a default situation. You don't need to know that they say Bismillah. It's enough that you think that's the norm. Okay? That's the explanation. So this has this. If you look in the traditional explanations, you're going to see two explanations. One, the Prophet ﷺ gave the answer based on the norm. You don't need to ask when it's the default, right? A brother turns up at my house with a woman for iftar, and I say, brother, is this your wife? He's like, no, I bought her, and walks away in a very upset way. It's like, of course, this is my wife. What do you expect? I'm going to walk into your house with some random woman. So I don't have to ask a question like that, do I? Because it's the default, right? That's the default. Is a brother going on Hajj with a woman. The default, this is your wife or your sister. That's it. That's the assumption, right? So the Prophet ﷺ asked, given the default. So the default of Arabia 1,400 years ago is not the same as the default of America or Europe in the 21st century, right? On top of that, how do the Shafis understand this hadith? The Shafis, they say, the Prophet ﷺ was telling us that it's not a condition you say Bismillah. So it actually proves nothing. It actually proves nothing, right? So what we're talking about is let's look at the norm, right? In America, I know, for example, in America, that if you put halal on something, that doesn't actually mean anything. There's no rules. So I know that halal, writing halal and not writing halal are the same. That's the same. Maybe, for example, in Singapore, it's not. So if I say it says halal, that they can only write halal if it fulfills conditions A, B, C, D, 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 and so therefore the default is going to be halal. But I know that in America it means nothing. I don't know what it's like in Canada. I don't know what it's like in, France or something. I don't know. But in America, halal means nothing. And so I have to go by the norm. Is it normal that Muslims slaughter in a proper way? As far as I know, in America, it isn't. That Muslims don't slaughter in a proper way, and they just put halal on anything. That's as far as I know. And they're not lying. They're just ignorant. There's a difference. They're not lying. I'm not saying that every Muslim is a liar. Brother, you should have a good opinion. I'm not talking about a good opinion. I'm not saying he's a good person or a bad person. I'm saying the default is he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. Okay. Inshallah khair. So inshallah, I will share the playlist for the whole talk, and there's some key texts that are quite useful to share with people because a lot of people they don't think, and they don't think or they don't know that there's a tradition. Like the Ummah has been around for a long time. And they'll quote, but Sheikh so-and-so said on his website. It doesn't really matter what Sheikh so-and-so says on his website. We've been around for a long time. There's the sources, so I share some of the key sources there. And you can see that. And then, or people think, oh, it's all about being certain. You can't eat meat unless halal unless you're certain. That's not the case. We don't need to stipulate that. You know, they have an issue in Hanafi fiqh, is that, for example, a man killed 20 chickens and he realized afterwards that one of them wasn't killed properly. But he doesn't know which one. You can eat them all. So he doesn't actually know that they're all halal. But that, you know, it's not, you're not obliged to know that they're all halal. That's the default. Right? The default is any of these chicken is a 19 out of 20 chance that it's halal, so you can eat it. Right? So we're not dealing with, because it would actually be impossible if you ask people to deal with yaqeen. You don't know that. You know, you don't know that that's actually the case. We're not dealing with it. We're talking about 51%, right? And you can hold people to that. And it's not a very high standard, right? You can hold people and say, listen, brother, I'm not eating this because it's less than 51. It's a 50-50, whether it's halal or not. I'm not going to eat it. If it's 51%, I'll eat it. I'm not trying to be annoying. I'm not trying to be strict, right? And as for our own personal approach, being ridiculously strict is good, right? So there were some scholars, they'll say it's wrong to be strict when it comes to halal and haram food. It's not true. The Salaf, you look at the way the Salaf did things, very clear, very strict. Imam Ahmad, for example, he was fishing, he saw somebody fishing, and the fish, he caught the fish, and the fish went back in. He did not eat fish from that river ever again. Why? Because this fish that I'm eating might be that man's. Imam Nawawi would not eat fruits in Damascus because the way it was managed by the government wasn't done in a good way. He wouldn't eat any fruit, period. So nobody came up to him and said, Sheikh, you're an extremist. They said, no, we respect that. That's good. For your own personal practice. For your own personal practice, that's fine. As for giving a fatwa that everybody has to be strict like you, no, that's not good. But for your own personal practice, being very careful, right? I don't shop at this place. I don't take in money from that company. I don't, that's a good thing to do, you know. That's fine. That's a good thing to do. It's a noble, and being careful is a good thing to do. Okay, inshallah, we'll stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك